Well, I'm back with this series. Crystal Dynamics just finally had their biggest hit ever with the Avengers game, and then completely floundered it that they have to relaunch, but, well, that's what happens when you're an online service game and your online service is shit. Maybe now they can remake Soul Reaver, or release HD versions of these games, or a game that concludes the story. I'll take anything. Like I said at the end of my Soul Reaver video, the game was essentially split into two. The entire second half of the game was cut because they wouldn't be able to get it out in time for its video game release day. I suppose crunch was a thing back then, but it wasn't as pronounced as it is today. Legacy of Kain as a series is probably more cut content than any other video game series in history. Just recently, somebody uncovered the alpha build of Soul Reaver 1, showing just how much stuff was cut from the game. It's rather amazing to look into. But regardless of being unfinished, Soul Reaver was a massive hit. While Raziel's game was a success, Crystal Dynamics had no intention of forgetting that the series was called Legacy of Kain. Blood Omen 2 had entered production, and what happened with that game, we'll get into next time. The plan was to make a saga, the Legacy of Kain series. The Blood Omen games would focus on Kain and his development, while the Soul Reaver games would focus on Raziel. The plan was to release Blood Omen 2 first, but because of Soul Reaver's success, that ended up giving Soul Reaver 2 an accelerated development cycle. They had less than 2 years to make it. You see, Soul Reaver 2 and Blood Omen 2 were developed simultaneously by different teams, which led to some contradictions between the two, one very blatant one that I question, but we'll get to that. Amy Hennig wanted to use time travel as a big theme for the story. She did her research of time travel fiction. That's the thing about time travel. It works however writers want it to work. Avengers Endgame claimed that you can't change the past, you just create alternate timelines. Back to the Future had everything go wrong with a sports almanac.
They can't change the future, right? Right?
Gargoyles went with history as irrefutable. You go back in time, you just did what you were supposed to do. Stable time loop, essentially. Here's the thing, until somebody actually does go back in time, nobody knows how time travel works. So it works however the writers want it to work.
Time travel!
Amy Hennig decided to go with the idea that history was irrefutable, but in certain cases, a paradox could be formed. Thus, this idea became the entire linchpin behind Legacy of Kain's whole narrative. Other themes were inspired by the works of Joseph Campbell, and theology surrounding concepts which formulated the crux of the story included the question that the only way a hero can ever succeed is by following his own path, and the question, can you change history or not? And if so, what does it mean to change history, in terms of being responsible for the repercussions?
Mobius foretold mine eons ago. We each play out the parts fate has written for us. Free will is an illusion.
They hired British comic book writer Paul Jenkins to help refine the game's script. Crystal Dynamics wanted Soul Reaver 2 to be more like a narrative-driven game that previous games had. The team had quite the ambitions for Soul Reaver 2, but the game had a bit of a troubled development. The game started development for the PlayStation, but with the PlayStation 2 fast approaching, it was decided to switch the game over to the new hardware, which forced the team to make some cuts to what they wanted to provide. 3 additional Reaver enhancements were planned with the 4 we actually got. Unfortunately, Soul Reaver 2 was considered to have fallen short of what the development team intended. Reading the Legacy of Kain The Lost Worlds website shows just how much content was cut from the games. Enough to maybe make 5 more games, but that's a story for another time. Now we got a game to cover. So we open with a new cinematic movie retelling the final battle of Soul Reaver 1, and I gotta say, it holds up very well today. If there's any series I'd love to see get an HD remaster, it's Legacy of Kain. The dialogue is essentially the same from the final battle, but shortened a little bit for time constraints. Raziel is confronting Kain, and at this point he's still hung up about the whole Seraphim Brotherhood, but let's listen a bit to the dialogue.
I found the tomb of Seraphim, Kain. How could you profane a priest by turning him into a vampire?
How could I not? One must keep his friends close, Raziel, and his enemies even closer. Who better to serve me than those whose passion transcends all notions of good and evil?
The Seraphim were saviors, defending Nazgul from the corruption that we represent. My eyes are open, Kain. I find no nobility in the unlife you rudely forced on my unwilling corpse.
You may have uncovered your past, but you know nothing of it. You think the Sarafan were noble, altruistic? Oh, don't be simple. Their agenda was the same as ours.
One thing that's a little inconsistent, at the end of Soul Reaver 1, Kain retreats into the portal wounded, yet he still says,
You nearly had me, Raziel.
but from the way it looks, he was pretty much in full control of their fight. Raziel goes through the portal and finds Mobius waiting for him.
Raziel, Redeemer and Destroyer, Pawn and Messiah, welcome, time-span soul. Welcome to your destiny.
So finally we get an answer to this cliffhanger. Raziel is naturally quite hostile towards Mobius. As it turns out, Mobius is omniscient, which means he knows how and where he's going to die.
You two are a pair. You're just as fatalistic as he is.
Death comes for us all, Raziel. It's just a matter of time.
Mobius tells Raziel where he will find Kain, at the Pillars, where he is destined to make the choice to destroy them. With that, Raziel departs to face Kain. It turns out Raziel is 30 years before the events of Blood Omen. This is around the time Kain had traveled back in time and murdered William the Just. But Soul Reaver 2 doesn't continue the revenge story. Instead, Raziel begins searching for higher knowledge about his own past. Let's cover our characters, shall we? Kain. This time he's not the major antagonist. At the beginning, Raziel confronts him at the Pillars, but instead of fighting him, he only asks that he listens. As it turns out, they witness the moment the Pillars are corrupted after Ariel's murder. And as it turns out, Kain's motivations aren't so black and white. While he does want to conquer the world, he knows he must restore the Pillars. But as he reveals to Raziel, the Pillars don't belong to the humans. They belong to the vampires.
I am presented with a dilemma. Let's call it a two-sided coin. If the coin falls one way, I sacrifice myself and thus restore the Pillars. But as the last surviving vampire in Nosgoth, this would mean the annihilation of our species. Mobius made sure of that. If the coin lands on the reverse, I refuse the sacrifice and thus doom the Pillars to an eternity of collapse. Either way, the game is rigged.
So yes, the game is rigged. What does one make in that choice? But Kain would say something that would define one of the major themes of the series.
To us.
Your arrogance is boundless, Kain.
There's a third option. A monumental secret hidden in your very presence here. But it's a secret you have to discover for yourself. Unearth your destiny, Raziel. It's all laid out for you here.
You said it yourself, Kain. There are only two sides to your coin.
Apparently so. But suppose you throw a coin enough times. Suppose one day it lands on its edge.
Oh no. Every time you turn up, something monumental and terrible happens. I don't think I have the stomach for it.
Kain is trying to get Raziel to assert his free will. Seen in the scene where he tries to convince Raziel to spare him when he's meant to kill him right there, and Raziel seems to take those words to heart as he just barely misses. This time he's trying to guide Raziel. While he is also manipulating Raziel for his own ends, he does seem to genuinely want to help Raziel, as we will soon see in the end. Raziel starts off where we left him in Soul Reaver. When he confronts Kain, he's willing to believe that he's killing Kain for a noble cause.
What makes you exempt, Kain? You're merely the last man standing. Why condemn me for simply carrying out what you hadn't the courage to do yourself?
Let's drop the moral posturing, shall we? We both know there's no altruism in this pursuit. Your reckless indignation led you here. I counted on it. There's no shame in it, Raziel. Revenge is motivation enough. At least it's honest. Hate me, but do it honestly.
So he's being drilled into that he is the savior of Nosgoth.
I'm sick of hearing that particular phrase. As for saving Nosgoth, so far I see precious little reason to bother.
While he still idolizes the Seraphon, he begins to see the more human side of the vampires and realizes just what the Seraphon truly were.
And while I still believe that vampirism was a plague and had to be wiped out, there was nothing noble or righteous in this crusade. This was simply ruthless persecution.
Raziel has perhaps realized that revenge isn't going to give him the answer he seeks. Raziel is an unwitting pawn in everyone's scheme, and he seems to realize this. Like Kain said, free will is an illusion, with the exception of Raziel, who actually seems to have a choice in what he does. But this plot point will come into play with the finale for now, Defiance. But you know what, we'll get back to him because we've got some bigger reveals planned for him. Mobius gets a much bigger role here, and we see that long before Nutraptor's madness poisoned the Circle, he was never corrupted. He was always an evil bastard. In fact, he claims he and Raziel were close.
Oh, please.
He's omniscient, so even when he shows up in various eras, it's ambiguous. Did Mobius time travel there, or did he just know that Raziel would be there? This is the game where Mobius was revealed to be a long-term schemer. He's such a smug snake. Killing him off in Blood Omen just isn't good enough. It's even revealed that he was the one who kept Malik from rescuing the other members of the Circle from Vorador.
Poor, deluded Raziel. Did you somehow imagine you had the guile to change history on me? I'm the Time Streamer. I knew your every intention before you did, you imbecile.
Vorador makes a surprise appearance. Raziel encounters him about 30 years prior to Blood Omen. He takes an interest in Raziel, believing him more demon than vampire. Vorador's main role in the story is to point Raziel in the direction of Janus Aldrin. Yeah, that character who was oft-mentioned in Blood Omen is finally getting a reveal. His appearance in this game makes sense as this takes place before Blood Omen, where he got his head chopped off. Unfortunately, his next appearance would just be confusing. One of the rare missteps Legacy of Kain would make with its narrative. Ariel makes another appearance. This time Raziel meets her about a century after Blood Omen, thus she's just depressed, understandably. Of course, this leads to some questions, like why Ariel doesn't recognize Raziel when they meet again during Soul Reaver 1. But maybe she does remember him, she just chooses not to say anything. Of course, Defiance has Raziel meet her even earlier into the timeline, but that wasn't supposed to happen. Ariel once again serves the purpose of guiding Raziel to his destination, but much more hostile this time.
He must die for the pillars to be restored. There is no other way.
Then consider this more ominous possibility. What if Kain's death does not restore the pillars? Consider that it may simply be too late, that this world may be beyond redemption, and that you may be bound here eternally.
The Elder God appears, and I'll say it again, I really miss Tony J. His voice was irreplaceable. Raziel is much more snarky towards his maker.
But perhaps not so omnipotent as you'd have me believe. Your hold on me appears to be tenuous.
But his true nature as the real villain of the series becomes much more apparent as it's revealed that Mobius is serving him, which provides more hints to his true nature, not as a god, but as an abomination.
You have grown willful, Raziel.
The Soul Reaver appears several times. Raziel's Wraith Blade symbolically mends the broken blade at William the Just's grave. It's here how we learn that a paradox can be formed in history. Kain and William the Just were both armed with the Soul Reaver, thus a paradox was able to be created there when Kain murdered William. So remember how the Wraith Blade attached itself to Raziel? There's a reason for that. We finally meet Janus Aldrin. Far from the monster who preyed on innocents, Raziel finds Janus to be very soft-spoken and not at all the monster the Seraphon said he was. One of the most elegant scenes in the franchise where Raziel discusses humanity with Janus.
They fear what they don't understand, and they despise what they fear. But no, I do not hate them.
He's played by the late Renee Auberjournis, the only new addition to the Legacy of Kain cast. Janus is perhaps the only truly good character in the game, but we all know he can't survive. Raziel is delayed in saving him and finds the true murderer of Janus to be someone he didn't expect. It's at this moment that Raziel finally realizes just how monstrous the Seraphim were.
Simply to save your life this once.
While I have taken yours.
Now Raziel knows what he has to do. So this story isn't a revenge tale, for the most part. It's about gaining knowledge, finding your place in the world. Do we have a higher purpose, or do we just play out the part that Destiny subscribes to us? Is free will truly an illusion, or can we make our own choices? This is where the long-standing story arc of Legacy of Kain begins to play out. We begin to see what the characters' true motivations are and where they stand. They didn't want Soul Reaver 2 to end with a cliffhanger, but it ended up doing so. We'll get to that. For now, let's cover the other stuff. As this game launched for the PlayStation 2, the graphical upgrade is very noticeable. Character models are better, cutscenes are better animated, you can actually see characters' mouths moving, and I'm honestly really impressed with the subtle facial animations. Look at Mobius' expression as Raziel threatens him. You can see his fear right there. After the first loading screen, Soul Reaver 2 continues to not have any loading times. The graphics are a little murky on the HD TV though. I really want an HD remaster of this series. Please give me that. The voice acting, as always, is just as fantastic. One of my favorite things to do was to go to the bonuses and watch the voice recordings. It's really amazing to watch professionals at work.
Who better to serve me than those whose passion transcends all notions of good and evil?
The Seraphim were saviors, defending Nosgoth from the corruption that we represent. My eyes are opened, Kain. I find no nobility in the unlife you rudely forced on my unwilling corpse.
The gameplay is pretty identical to Soul Reaver 1, so fortunately I don't have to spend too much time going over it. I'd be repeating myself. Raziel maintains all his abilities from Soul Reaver 1. He doesn't arbitrarily lose them and have to regain them like so many other games do. The combat is the same as Soul Reaver 1, except now Raziel doesn't have to throw enemies if he doesn't have a weapon. He can now impale them with his hands. Early on, Raziel gains the ability to summon the Wraithblade at will. This will let Raziel kill his enemies very quickly, but he will be unable to devour their souls, and if the Wraithblade is allowed to feed too much, it will turn its hunger on Raziel. Fortunately, checkpoints still exist, so it's impossible to get a game over in Soul Reaver 2. Shifting between the realms can unlock new passageways, the same as always. That being said, there are some differences. Raziel can now obtain elemental Reavers. The Dark Reaver, the Light Reaver, Air Reaver, and Fire Reaver, which all serve a purpose of solving puzzles. However, whenever Raziel shifts to the material realm, he will lose his Elemental Reaver and will have to recharge it at an Elemental Font. What I will say about the puzzles? No block puzzles. Thank God. There are some tedious ones to be sure, but nothing I wasn't able to figure out on my own. Soul Reaver 2 has you go to 3 different eras, and they all vary in look and enemy design. 30 years before Blood Omen has both male and female Seraphim warriors for you to fight. Going a century after Blood Omen will have human enemies fighting monsters. Of course, when they see you, they'll gang up on you, because of course they will. Soul Reaver 2's combat wasn't meant for fighting 6 enemies at a time, which is probably why they gave you the ability to summon the Wraithblade at will so you can quickly even the odds. Soul Reaver 2 is very linear. Each era might have a way to get through a path that you can't get in one era. The final era is all covered in snow, which means death in this case. One enemy I find particularly annoying is the Sorcerer. They'll run away from you while the Seraphim will attack you. You're better off taking them out first. Because Soul Reaver 2 is very linear, that means there's a lot of backtracking, and there's no fast travel system. There's been a fast travel system in the first 2 games, so why not this one? Of course, at the end, you have to run all the way back to the Seraphim stronghold, and you gotta face a certain number of enemies to unlock the way. It's just artificially lengthening the game. So I'll sum up Soul Reaver 2 before I get to the ending. It's not a bad game. It's ambitious, but unfortunately, development trolls would cause the game to fall short of said ambitions. However, it did deepen the mythology and really made Legacy of Kain into a grandstanding epic. Unfortunately, things would fall apart with the next game, which this game actually has a little preview of. Boy, if only we knew. So Raziel comes across the Soul Reaver in the Seraphim stronghold, and you are forced to use it, and it basically makes you unkillable as you will gradually heal your wounds. Raziel kills the human counterparts of his brother before finally coming across himself. It's amazing Seraphim and Raziel doesn't draw the similarities.
You're a righteous fiend, aren't you? Apparently I am.
Yes, Soul Reaver 2 doesn't have bosses. Not really, so it's only a matter of time before you deliver the killing blow.
I
It's brilliant. He started out idolizing the Seraphon, but only ended up hating himself even more. But then the Reaver turns on Raziel. As it turns out, the soul that's been trapped in the Wraithblade for all these years is Raziel himself. This is why it's shattered. The Reaver could not devour its own soul. Raziel is doomed to play out this perpetual loop for all eternity. It is then that Kain appears and he makes his move. But even this turns out to be a subtle manipulation, and things are only about to get worse.
Raziel, Janus must stay dead.
But Kain's warning was lost as I slipped into the spirit realm, too weak to maintain my physical form. And there, waiting for me as always, was the Reaver, the Wraithblade, my own soul, twinned and bound eternally to me. And I realized that I could never escape my terrible destiny. I had merely postponed it. History abhors a paradox.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please hit that bell, like, and subscribe button. If you want updates, follow me on Twitter or join my Discord, which are provided in the description below. See you next time.